Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show and to the first of two editions where Prime Minister May fights a desperate battle for the survival of her European strategy. But will it be this particular English leader's Agincourt or perhaps more likely her Bannockburn? Next week, a panel of politicians will be reading the runes following the meaningful vote in the House of Commons. But this week, we turn for advice to academia and to the commentariat for prophecy. First, King's College Law Professor Ewan McGahey charts us through the legal minefield confronting the Prime Minister. And then, two top journalists give different views on Theresa May's chances of making it through Christmas as Prime Minister. Former SNP MP and columnist for The National, George Kerevan, argues that a Prime Minister deserted by much of her own party will be finally sunk by a fatal combination of Ulster Unionists and Scottish nationalists. After 2 years of negotiation dominated by the Irish border, this week's shock opinion from the European Court's Advocate General brings the Scottish dimension back to the forefront. If MPs can order the government to stop the Article 50 clock, then the Prime Minister's choice of my way or the Brexit highway becomes a hollow threat. However, one of May's doughtiest defenders in Fleet Street, award-winning columnist Peter Oborne, cautions that it ain't over until it's over for May. Nobody yet, he warns, has made their fortune by betting against the durability of this particular Prime Minister. But first, your tweets, your messages and your emails, and a great amount of comment on our St Andrew's Day special, which featured some of Scotland's finest artistic talent. However, thanks first to eagle-eyed Thomas McManus, who spotted that among the footage of Scottish bands celebrating the country's National Day, there was one, how shall I put it, of a more religious than a national persuasion. As a result of Thomas's query, we were able to edit the film in time for our main broadcast and our Facebook premiere. Thomas told us that his wife would chuckle at this mention of his name, and indeed his corrective email. And so, in this week's show, we're open once again to anyone who spots our deliberate mistakes. First, we hear from Lily Byron, who says, "Hello, I love this," in reference to the St Andrew's Day show. "I always ran a St Andrew's Day celebration in Rose Hall Primary School when I was a head teacher, and invited the whole community to come along. We had great Scottish fun, thinking of others by inviting people to donate to the local food bank and MFR toys." Robert says, "Agrees, Scotland has a lot of this world's greatest talents." Yes, indeed. Louise says, "Good to see a Scottish classical musician." That was Caitlin Heathcote. "I mind the Scotland's music series about 1990 was the first time I heard our musical history treated like a normal country, rather than reduced to a folk tradition only." John says, "I fair enjoyed the St Andrew's Day Fair Saturday Alex Salmond Show. Lovely to hear Sheena Wellington's all too brief rendition of Burns. Also Ryan Burns and Caitlin Heathcote, who were both highly enjoyable." Yes, they were indeed. And finally, Marion, who says, "A public holiday for St Andrew's Day would be great. It will come one day, I'm sure." Well, we all hope so too, Marion. And now to the Brexit denouement. This week, the House of Commons started their 5-day-long Brexit debate, which will determine the fate of May's Brexit deal and perhaps of the Prime Minister herself. However, this week was barely started when the government got itself embroiled in an unseemly squabble with Parliament over the publication of legal advice. Here are what the opposing advocates had to say, but first, presiding on the bench, and most unfortunately for the government, Mr Speaker, the formidable John Bercow, insisting on the rights and prerogatives of the House of Commons and making it clear that no Attorney-General, be he ever so high, is above the writ of Parliament.
"I have considered the matter carefully, and I am satisfied that there is an arguable case that a contempt has been committed."
This House has now spoken, and it's of huge constitutional and political significance. It is, I think, unprecedented for this House to find government ministers in contempt. The motion makes clear that government must now publish the Attorney-General's final legal advice in full.
And in light of the expressed will of the House, we will publish the final and full advice provided by the Attorney-General to Cabinet.
As our first guest explains, the Prime Minister should be careful not to lose her legal advisers. She may have need of them shortly. Alex spoke to Professor Ewan McGahey of King's College about the range of legal challenges now imminently confronting the Prime Minister.
Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show, Ewan.
Thanks very much. Good to be here.
Now, can we chart our way through this legal minefield facing the Prime Minister? The big surprise decision for many of the European Court of Justice, at least the opinion of the Advocate General, about the revocability, of Article 50. How significant could that be?
I think it's very interesting because it means that the constitutional structure of the European Union and of the UK is proving to be much more resilient to the threats that Brexit poses than many people thought. So it means that the UK can unilaterally revoke notification of Article 50 to leave the European Union, and that could happen ultimately in two ways. Number one, Parliament could, if you like, take back control from the executive.
So when you say take back control, that's a reference to the Brexiteers' slogan during the referendum campaign.
That's right. And so there's two things that could happen. Either Parliament could say that on deliberation, perhaps even after a second referendum, we don't want to leave the European Union anymore. And the other thing that's going to happen this Friday is that there's a court case to say that the Brexit referendum was so corrupt, so tainted by overspending, theft of Facebook data, and also Russian interference, that the vote's integrity was seriously undermined. So it's a very important stepping stone to get to, I think, a proper constitutional basis for the future of this country.
So let's take these in turn. This opening up of the options that the European Court of Justice may deliberate and decide, how likely is the Court of Justice to follow its Advocate General's recommendation published this week?
Well, Advocate Generals are followed by the Court of Justice about 80% of the time.
So it could go back from the Court of Justice to the Court of Session in Edinburgh, who will then, after the advice of the Court of Justice, make a deliberation, which unusually would have application beyond Scotland, but for the whole of the UK.
Yeah, and of course, I think courts in Scotland are like the courts in the rest of the United Kingdom, which is they fundamentally have to apply the law. And so if you've got a process which is corrupt, including in the Brexit referendum, then I think that that's something that they're going to want to see. They want to see the rule of law applied like every other judge.
So the political effect of that legal judgment is MPs, having been effectively presented with my way or the highway by the Prime Minister, now have opening up another option which could allow time for another referendum or indeed a general election.
It could do. And the third option as well is that we're going to see this court case on Friday about what really happened in the Brexit referendum. So I think it's very important to see that there has been unprecedented illegality in a vote. So we've had overspending, about 6.4% by vote leave. It's a criminal offence. Second of all, we've got the biggest fine in history on a company like Facebook, £500,000, not much, but a lot.
Not much for Facebook.
Not much for Facebook, for allowing breach of its privacy. But one of the biggest things that's still under-resolved is it's clear that Russia and the Kremlin was organising an operation to interfere in the Brexit poll. We know that hundreds of thousands of bots on Twitter. The National Crime Agency has investigated Aaron Banks because allegedly the Kremlin...
Make it clear that Mr Banks has not been found guilty of any crime as yet. But you think a court will regard these indications from the Electoral Commission and the House of Commons Committee as serious enough to set aside the result of a referendum?
I don't think that there's any one solution to the kind of serious mess that we're in. But what is absolutely clear is that Russia has been launching a campaign right around the Western world. It has been interfering in the American political process, which has probably led to Donald Trump being in the White House. It supported Le Pen in France. It supported the AfD in Germany. It's been supporting separatist groups. It drummed up support for the Scottish independence vote. It drummed up support for the Catalan independence vote. And the reason why Russia is keen on doing this is it because it wants to weaken the resolve of the European Union and the international community to take action against climate change.
You realise, of course, that President Obama intervened in the Scottish referendum, and of course David Cameron asked Vladimir Putin for support against Scottish independence. Doesn't this sort of country interference with everybody else's affairs go on par for the course, not least in America, which has interfered in elections all around the world?
I think that you indirectly make an important point, which is that we need to get back to the principle of votes being fair and free, just like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says we're entitled to. But if Russia is interfering and the United States is interfering in any vote, this is debasing the right of citizens to choose their own government and their own future.
Have interfered in anybody else's elections?
That's not the point. Fundamentally, look, I think that if that was happening, and I'm sure it has, it's wrong. But the nakedness...
Like destabilising an elected government in Iran, for example?
Well, I think that you can't get into a question of everybody's doing wrong, so therefore there's no right.
So don't courts make decisions over and above politics? If we take the European Court of Justice ruling, both the UK government wanted to stop the case, and the European Commission didn't want the European Court of Justice to rule that Article 50 was revocable. So both political establishments didn't want the court to rule as it looks like it's doing. So doesn't the court, whether it be the Court of Session in Edinburgh, or the Supreme Court in London, or the European Court of Justice, go over and above political considerations and try to examine what is the law?
Yes, that's right. We don't have cases on referendums, but we have cases on courts declaring MP elections void or council election seats void because the process was corrupt. So if the interference or illegality would have made the result different, or if the process was so corrupt that it substantially violated the laws on elections or referendums, then at common law, you can say that the vote is void.
From a legal perspective, what's the denouement of all these huge legal and political questions?
All the evidence points to the deep, deep corruption of the referendum. Because and foreign and Russian interference, you might be cautious about having another referendum to get out of this mess. Now, that said, taking the legal hat off and putting on sort of citizen's hat on, I think you've got to be pragmatic, and perhaps it's the right thing for another vote to take place, especially given that 2 out of the 4 nations of the United Kingdom, Scotland and Northern Ireland, voted to remain.
So if you had to guess from a legal and a political perspective, is there going to be another referendum?
I have a bet with my constitutional law students. I bet them £1 that the government wouldn't still be in place by the end of our constitutional law course at the end of March. And so I think that I might just be getting £1 from the students. But then again, there's a lot of things that could happen.
Well, you're in best of luck in your bet with your constitutional law students. Coming up after the break, from the legal minefield, we move to the political minefield facing the Prime Minister, with commentators north and south of the border from opposite sides looking at what lies ahead for Theresa May.
Welcome back. When the Commons got down to the main motion, the meaningful vote on May's deal, things did not take a turn for the better for the embattled Prime Minister. With Scott Nats to the left of her and Democratic Unionists to the right of her, she had the guns of Labour in front of her and the knives of the Tory backbenchers behind her.
I hope the Honourable Lady will not compound that by opposing a Section 30 for Scotland when the Scottish Government wants it. Her history of opposition is not a good one, and she should respect the democracy she's talking about. It applies to Scotland too, Prime Minister.
But can I ask the Prime Minister, in terms of guaranteeing Northern Ireland's position, she will remember that in paragraph 50 of the joint report that we spent 4 days negotiating, there were guarantees given to Northern Ireland. Never mind the words that have been said in this House today. It was actually in the text. Why has that been deleted?
The deal before us would make our country worse off.
I really can't believe that there is a single member of this House who sincerely believes that this deal we have before us is a good deal.
Politics is as much about listening to people from all sides of the debate and then doing what you believe is in our national interest. And that's what I've done.
But when it comes down to brass tacks, can a Prime Minister deserted by much of her party look elsewhere for support? Alex asked columnist for The National, George Kerevan, if the Scottish political play would be unlucky for May.
George Kerevan, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Hello, Alex. Nice to be talking to you again.
Now, George, you've got Edinburgh Castle there behind you in Edinburgh studio. But for the last 2 years, the Scottish dimension to the European debate seemed to be slipping down the agenda. But now this week, with the case and the indication of a ruling in the European Court of Justice and the revocability of Article 50, it's back with a bang. How important do you believe that is?
Well, it is indeed important, and Scotland is back with a bang. Of course, it's always been here. It's just that Theresa May and the Tories were having their own little private discussion. What's happened this week is that people have been forced to remember that Scotland isn't just a land of economists like you and me, Alex. It's principally a land of lawyers, and it's Scottish lawyers, people like Jana Cherry, who forced Scotland back into the debate by going to the Court of Justice in Europe and getting this ruling that the UK can walk away from Article 50, can walk away from leaving the EU if it wants to.
Must be a bit of an irony. Is it going to be appreciated in the hallowed halls of the Court of Session? It's a Scottish judicial case which seems to be opening up a new vista potentially for members of Parliament in Westminster.
Well, I mean, I think there must be some wry smiles in the Court of Session, and the original Scottish Parliament has been taken over by the lawyers and is actually the main Scottish law codes at the moment. There's a few lawyers now thinking, well, maybe Scotland will become independent, maybe those law courts will actually be the law courts for an independent country someday. And that's the route through that is through the European crisis.
Now, looking at the dramatic events in the House of Commons this week, obviously something you're very familiar with in terms of the rules and procedures of the Parliament, Theresa May seems to have divided her own party in terms of her proposal. She seems to have united the Labour Party against her, but simultaneously has alienated the Ulster Unionists and the Scottish Nationalists. Is there any hope at all, in your opinion, for the Prime Minister, given that landscape in the House of Commons?
I think what we're fundamentally seeing, Alex, is the breakup of the British parliamentary system. The Parliament and political parties that have existed for the last 100 years. We're seeing the Labour break up, we're also seeing the Tory party breaking up. And therefore the smaller parties like the Ulster Unions and the SNP, they become strategic in the direction that Parliament goes. To alienate them, therefore, in those circumstances is just political imbecility.
But is there any proposal in Britain's relationship with Europe that commands enough support to carry Parliament and the people?
Well, I suspect there's quite a large voting support within the existing bloc of parties for what they're calling Norway Plus. In other words, for the UK to formally come out of the EU, but to stay within the single market and the customs union. I suspect there are enough centre ground MPs in the Tory party, and I suspect most Labour MPs would support that, and the SNP would support that. But whether in the kind of hothouse atmosphere of Westminster you could get some kind of deal brokered, I remain sceptical of that. But certainly that seems to be the one logical compromise that could come out of all of this, short of going to the country or holding another referendum.
And in a phrase, George Kerevan, a New Year resolution for Theresa May?
Let the Scots go their own way, Theresa.
Thank you very much, George Kerevan in Edinburgh. And I'll be up to join you by Hogmanay.
We'll have a wee dram together.
And so the Celtic Tiger might finally roar just at the most inopportune moment for the Prime Minister, when the votes are being counted in the lobbies. Of course, she's not without her supporters. In the last few days, the Mail and the Express have deserted the hardline Brexiteers and rallied to the May banner. However, her most consistent defender in Fleet Street has been celebrated columnist Peter Oborne, who cautions Alex that it is too soon to write a political obituary for Theresa May.
Peter Oborne, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a huge pleasure, Alex.
Thank you, Peter. Now, you've been a staunch defender of Theresa May. In fact, one of the only defenders in terms of columnists. Are you still with her in this moment of trial for the Prime Minister?
Absolutely. And do you know, again and again, the metropolitan media class and their acolytes have trashed the Prime Minister, said she's finished. Again and again, I've pointed out, no, she isn't. This is an indomitable, a very resilient woman. And again, guess what? I've been proved right. She now meets the ultimate test.
Well, next Tuesday, I mean, it's either going to be Agincourt or perhaps Bannockburn. But you think she can still triumph through, despite the parliamentary arithmetic?
It's the most difficult one yet. But I think, oddly enough, that the dramatic vote in Parliament on Tuesday night has actually helped her, even though she was defeated and routed as no Prime Minister in modern times has been before. But what it's meant is...
This is on the publication of the legal advice or the amendment to allow the opening up of parliamentary options on Brexit.
It's that amendment which means that Parliament can actually seize control of the Brexit process. And what that means, of course, is that no deal which has been pursued by the Brexiteers suddenly becomes very unlikely, if not impossible. And so now Mrs May can say to the Brexiteers, you either support my form of Brexit, this soft Brexit so-called, or Parliament will seize back control. And we know that these MPs, for the most part, are pro-European. Anything can happen after that, including Britain staying in the European Union.
Is that why she's chosen Michael Gove, perhaps not the most reliable of allies, but he has been chosen to sum up the debate on Tuesday?
See, that is quite... She's been much shrewder. Only people who read my columns know this, by the way. Much shrewder than people understand. She's brilliantly split the Tory Brexiteers between the Boris Johnsons and the David Davises and Mr Gove, who's regarded as one of the most perfidious politicians of all time on the Tory right, a serial traitor. But he will stand up there, and I can tell you now what he will say. He'll say, either you back Mrs May and you'll get Brexit, or vote her down and there will be no Brexit at all. That is the message he will be sending straight to the Tory Brexiteers.
So you still think, and you are in a minority opinion on this, that she could still win through in these next few vital days?
Absolutely. I think that it could be that it'll take two shoves, but if she gets a narrow defeat first time round, then she will come back again and see if she can push it through second time. If it was a big defeat, but I think the idea that she might be defeated by 200, which is being put about by allies of Downing Street, classic expectation management, in order to make a minor defeat look like a great heroic victory.
A Dunkirk.
Indeed, and I think that's what they're aiming for. But I think 40 is being talked of as the defeat she can wear first time round, with a massive attempt to turn it round second time.
Well, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that despite the Prime Minister's undoubted resilience, despite your passionate support of her position, the defeat is so major that she has no prospect of continuing in office. What then?
Well, I've got some news for you, actually. I wouldn't be that surprised if we got a coalition government which would include the Scottish National Party, for instance, for a while, an emergency government, national government, led by, and this is my prediction for today, Prime Minister, nobody's heard of him. He's called Lidington, David Lidington, the dullest man in British politics, may step forward as the Prime Minister, the unlikely Prime Minister.
And if you check the odds on David Lidington
becoming Prime Minister... I know you're a betting man. They're enormous. I looked at one list. He's so obscure, he's not even on it. And, I mean, you can get any odds you like. But the fact is that I think he's so boring, that he's so obscure that he won't put off. He's so unpolitical in a way that Corbyn and the surgeon and people will feel happy enough to work with him. And I'll tell you what, that is the secret weapon the Tory Whip's officers have got, the threat of Lido.
Peter Oborne, thank you so much. Now, I can't say that you can use this to toast the Lidington Premiership, but this is, for appearing in the Alex Salmond Show, the Quaich. It's Scots Gaelic for the loving cup. You know the drill. Whiskey in the Quaich, only Scotch, and then round your many, many friends.
Well, we'll drink it on New Year's Eve.
My birthday.
I'll drink a toast to you, fill it up with Scotch whisky, and pass it round the Oborne family table. My mother, who is Scottish, will really approve.
Peter Oborne, thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed.
In many ways, this week's parliamentary trials and tribulations of the Prime Minister are a tale of two backstops. First, the one that's right there at the heart of her European agreement. The one which is proving so unpalatable to MPs of all persuasions, and as we now know from the published legal advice, is no mere bagatelle. Instead, that backstop potentially condemns the UK to a form of Neverland between EU membership and the wider world. The Catholic Church some years ago abolished limbo as part of doctrine. Theresa May has given it political flesh in her Brexit agreement. It's hardly surprising, therefore, that it's so unacceptable to so many. For Remainers, it retains the vestige of membership without any of the advantages of influence over collective decision-making. For Leavers, it's departing in name only, but without any of the purported advantages of the freedom to chart a new trading and economic destiny. However, proposing such an arrangement was the duty of European negotiators, trying hard to fulfil their obligations to the remaining 27, and in particular to that loyal European member state of Ireland. From the EU perspective, it's not a punishment of the UK, but a guarantee of the principles of the European Union. Not to insist on such a backstop would have been an act of great charity by European negotiators. Now, Michel Barnier's training was as a French Gaullist, where charity is not rated uppermost in their many otherwise fine qualities. That brings us to the second backstop, or reserve position, the one that doesn't exist. The Prime Minister was bound to fail in negotiation as soon as the decision was made to invoke Article 50 and thus enter into a time-limited negotiation without any reserve position. For Brexiteers, that meant preparations for no deal. How even an organised no deal would be intensely damaging. Skydiving with a parachute is essentially safer than undertaking the same activity without one, but it's still a risky endeavour. However, to invoke Article 50 without this backstop was an act of lunacy, for which morally, I suppose, the substantial majority of MPs who voted for that 2 years ago are jointly and severally liable. However, while they may be jointly liable, it's the Prime Minister who's in office and responsible for the looming catastrophe. And that brings us to the Advocate General of the European Court of Justice, and that opinion that, after all, Article 50 might be unilaterally revoked by the UK. We have discussed this case, initiated by Scottish parliamentarians, many times on this show. Well, up until now, at least, it's been largely ignored by the mainstream London media. Within this expected judgment, there is the solution to Britain's Brexit bourach, and that is for a parliament which cannot itself summon a majority for anything palatable, but has a substantial majority against the unpalatable no deal. That parliament has but one final duty, which is to prepare the ground for the decision to be made by others. If the Prime Minister's uneasy compromise finally bites the dust next week, then the choice is between a renewed negotiation with a declared backstop of no deal or remaining in the European Union. That decision between the two real options could either be made by referendum or by general election or both. Revoking Article 50 allows the time for the people to make such a choice. And so from Taz and me and all at the show, it's goodbye for now.